Close to 300 COVID-19 cases are now isolating at home in Auckland as the city moves to a suppression strategy. A strict assessment criteria has to be met for someone to isolate at home, and there's regular health checks. Case numbers for this outbreak are creeping closer to 3,000, putting more pressure on an already strained MIQ system. Well, joining us now is Dr. Christine McIntosh, who's the Northern Region Primary Care Clinical Lead for COVID-19 care in the community. Kia ora, Doctor.
Oh, kia ora, Lisa.
Can you just talk us through the list, the criteria that you have to meet for staying at home? What are some of the key factors there?
Yeah, sure. There are criteria about who is able to stay at home and isolate at home. In the end, the criteria are worked through by the medical officer of health and public health, and they really individually assess the situation and make a decision about whether that is a suitable place for somebody to isolate from. So, while there is some general criteria, there are a lot of specifics that need to be worked through, and which are very individual and very whānau based. So there's not an exact list that you can go through, but there's sort of factors that they look at that contribute. Is it a suitable place? And how many family members you have at the house, and what are the safety issues around that as far as passing on the COVID and things like that. So yeah.
Christine, your phone line's just a bit scratchy there, so I might get you to move around. But can we just go through some of the things that was listed actually in the media release that was put out? You need a phone and internet connection in your property, correct?
Yes, although if you don't have a phone, then it is maybe possible to supply you with one. Yep. So that's sort of some useful things to have.
Own transport, because you have to get to the testing station, so nobody who doesn't have access to a car can home isolate.
Well, that also, that is a very useful thing to have, but it's not necessarily a strict criteria. It can otherwise be sorted out. So, and that's what I mean, that, there are some criteria, but they're not absolutely strict criteria. It just needs to be really worked through.
And does a COVID positive person, do they need to have a bathroom that they can use exclusively?
Yeah, well, that really needs to be talked through with a whānau, because obviously once somebody has COVID-19, especially the Delta strain, oftentimes the close contacts have already had contact with that person in their, infectious period. And so, that really is a decision to be made by the medical officer of health, and also the whānau, and see what they're comfortable with, and whether they really want, whether they need to isolate away from other family members. So, you ask some really good questions, but they're actually really tricky and they need to be all worked through.
So if let's just take an example. Imagine a house here and it's got multiple people in it. One's tested positive for COVID-19. If that person has their own bathroom and a room that they can stay in by themselves, are the other occupants of the house considered to be in isolation as well, i.e. they're not allowed to leave to go anywhere?
And that would be generally the case, I would expect, and that would be up to, the public health to determine whether they are close contacts. But I think in most cases, yes, they would be close contacts, and they would be required to isolate with that person in the home.
Regardless of whether, say, someone's living on a separate floor to other individuals in the house?
And I think that's where, the medical officer of health needs to make a determination about, whether that is in fact a case of close contact or not. And so, that is, very individualised. And I think we need to really stress that actually it's all worked through in quite a lot of detail at that point by the Public Health Service.
So does the system basically, further advantaged people, the ones that are in better housing, have greater means, access to their own transport, internet connection, cell phone, etc.?
I think that it's really a determination based on the needs that we have, from a public health point of view, as far as where the best place is for that person to isolate, and also from a personal health and wellbeing and a whānau health and wellbeing point of view. So I think that it's really about those factors at the moment, and we require that at the moment under our current public health settings. So it's really about all those features, really, as far as, is this okay from a public health perspective? Is it okay from, a wellbeing perspective for that whānau and that individual? So, those are the things that are really considered at this point in time.
So in terms of the health checks, right, you're giving households basically a thing that they clip onto their finger. It can measure oxygen levels. Do you get real-time measurements, or are they then required to know enough to report those results to you?
Yeah, sure. So we've learned a lot from our overseas models, from our colleagues in Sydney and from around the world, really, about what really works for good home isolation and how we can do that safely. And so having a pulse oximeter is an absolute game changer. That's what our colleagues overseas have told us, because it enables you to know, what people's oxygen levels are. So when they pack with the oximeters sent out, it's sent out with instructions, and people are talked through how to use that oximeter. So at the moment, though, it's not a virtual thing that you can get the results in a central way. People are taught how to use that, and they're able to use that on themselves and their family members to keep an eye on themselves. And they have regular check-ins with the health check team, who will find out, how their readings have been going and check on their general well-being.
Thank you for joining us. That's Dr. Christine McIntosh there, talking about home isolation of COVID-positive cases.